On this Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, Joe Mullinax is back, Jack, and I am mad at DeMichael Cole for trading for Robert Williams. Seriously, DeMichael, Robert Williams the third? Robert Williams the third? You brought him to Memphis, hypothetically speaking, a couple of days ago. I'm going to address that. I'm going to talk about the art of protecting players from public relations shame in the modern NBA, but I'm going to lead off reflecting on Jerry West and his time with the Memphis Grizzlies. You're with Locked On Grizzlies as we speak. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Each and every time an episode drops of Locked On Grizzlies, hopefully you are with us. I am Joe Mullinax. I have not been with you, dear listener, dear viewer, for a couple of days. I missed you terribly. I hope you're well. I hope your family is well. And most importantly, I hope that you enjoy this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. My partner, DeMichael Cole, very busy with the news of Jerry West passing. Obviously, the Memphis ties have some connections there. So some news stuff that DeMichael has to do. And I also want to shout out my wonderful partner, DeMichael Cole, a great opportunity for him over at 92.9 FM ESPN in Memphis this week as a guest host. Make sure you're checking him out there if you aren't doing so each and every day. You can check him out this afternoon and I believe Friday afternoon as well. He's a fantastic co-host of mine. I hope that Jeffrey Wright is treating him right there with 92.9. I have a good relationship going back a few years with 92.9 as a former guest on the Gary Parrish show and doing some other work over there. So lots of good stuff. Very appreciative of 92.9 and very happy for DeMichael that he's getting that chance to guest host. So make sure you're checking that out. 92.9 ESPN there in Memphis. So he's a very busy guy. I'm happy to fly solo on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Today, Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Of course, as always, we here at Locked On Grizzlies are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Literally anywhere there's a podcast feed, you can check out Locked On Grizzlies. Again, I am Joe Mullinax. I've covered the Grizzlies since about 2011, 2012, so over a decade now at various spots. But the gentleman who passed away on Wednesday, his scope, his scale in the NBA, even though he does have a chapter to his story that was in Memphis, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Obviously, Jerry West is a bigger player in the history of the NBA than that. He is the freaking logo, for crying out loud. And I want to say I've done my part, dear listener, dear viewer. I don't know if you have, educating today's youth about who Jerry West was. I was talking about Jerry's passing with some student athletes of mine, and they don't even know who Jerry West was. They didn't even know that he was the logo. I had to literally show them some highlights and teach up the youth about what Jerry West is physically capable of as a basketball player. They didn't even know of him as the GM that obviously Memphis Grizzlies folks would be more familiar with, and he had other front office stints around the NBA. But here on Locked On Grizzlies, the most relevant piece of Jerry West's NBA story is the work that he did as the general manager of the Memphis Grizzlies. West comes to the Grizzlies after a brief retirement in 2002, and I'm reading or quoting, paraphrasing from DeMichael's post about it in the Commercial Appeal. DeMichael writes, he wanted the challenge in building of a franchise into a winner, and that's what he did in Memphis. The Grizzlies went 28-54 during the 2002-2003 season before West turned the franchise around. He hired Hubie Brown, which was a massively important hire, led Memphis to a 50-32 record the following season. Brown was the coach of the year. West was executive of the year. And then Memphis went on to have 3 winning seasons again before Jerry West retired in 2007. So West had a pretty successful run as an NBA front office aficionado, but again, he was a phenomenal player. The literal logo of the league. He leaves behind an extremely important legacy. And he's one of those guys I think recently I talked about on an episode having multiple Hall of Fame careers. Right? Like being in a position to be a Hall of Fame broadcaster and a Hall of Fame player. West did something like that in terms of his front office work. There are so many aspects of his journey through the game of basketball that you could acknowledge and say, wow, he's one of the best to ever do it. The playing kind of speaks for itself, again, unless you haven't had a chance to watch him play, haven't done a ton of research. He was a 14-time All-Star. He was named as a member of the NBA's 35th, 50th, and 75th anniversary teams. 8 championships as an executive, 6 with the Lakers and then 2 with the Warriors. This guy, literally from the court to off the court, in the front office environment, a basketball genius, to paraphrase the worst commissioner in professional sports, Adam Silver. I shouldn't have said that in this segment where we're talking about Jerry West. I apologize. NBA commissioner, Adam Silver. And this is a quote from him. He distinguished himself not only as an NBA champion and an all-star in 14 of his playing seasons, all 14, but also as a consummate competitor, embracing the biggest moments. He was the league's first finals MVP, made rising to the occasion his signature quality, earning him the nickname Mr. Clutch. So again, this is a guy who had a phenomenal playing career, one of the league's best 75 players in the history of professional basketball at the highest level that has provided the NBA. Then he goes on to have success with the Lakers in a front office role. He goes on to have success with the Warriors as a member of their front office. And then, of course, in Memphis, he doesn't win a ring. But what he did for the Memphis Grizzlies is he made them legitimate. Right? They were a fledgling team that had come from Vancouver that was not having the success that they wanted the team to have. West comes in, takes on the challenge, and builds them into a contender. He hires a coach in Hubie Brown that's able to build them into contender. He makes savvy roster moves behind the likes of Mike Miller and Pau Gasol. And they allow for the Memphis Grizzlies to establish what is needed to start a fan base and start generating, as I like to call it, and others call it too, I didn't invent the phrase, generational fandom, right? It is extremely difficult. You have your diehards, right? People that are going to be super excited that the pro team is in your hometown now, and you just want to be a supporter of the Memphis Grizzlies because you love basketball. Woohoo! You go and you sit in the pyramid and you watch a 28-54 product. But if you're 28-54 every year, especially as essentially an expansion team, you are not going to see your fan base grow. There has to be some semblance of success. Doesn't have to be a championship, but there has to be a team that is competitive, that does have success, that does have examples of reasons to be worth cheering for. And in the professional realm, that by and large constitutes and includes winning basketball games. So Hubie Brown, that roster led by Pau Gasol and Mike Miller, obviously other pieces involved as well. Jerry West understood the game of basketball perhaps better than just about anybody in the history of professional basketball. He saw the game in a way, both on and off the floor, that makes you want to learn more about the game itself. It makes you want to pick his brain and see it how he sees it. And that doesn't mean he's perfect. None of us are, right? Him telling Kobe Bryant that he shouldn't want to go to the Memphis Grizzlies. That certainly was a flub up, if I do say so myself. I'm a little bit biased, but I would suggest that telling one of the best players in the history of the league that, it sounds like you might be interested in Memphis, but you shouldn't come here. Shouldn't come to the Grizzlies. It's beneath you. It's not for you. Whatever West said. Not necessarily the coolest thing that he could have done, right? But he did establish a winning structure. Even though it didn't lead to postseason success, it was incremental. And that is one of the hardest things in fandom. You want your team to be a championship contender, and I'm dealing with it now to a lesser extent, right? Do we want to win a championship or not? I'm going to yell at my partner, even though he's not on the show, because I think he blew it with his Robert Williams trade. I think he blew it. I'll challenge him about it tomorrow on the Friday edition of the show. But even though we're not all perfect, we all have a place where we feel comfortable and where we feel we can be our best, whether it's professionally, personally, whatever the case might be. Sometimes it's both. And I think for Jerry West, he lived a basketball life. And that's maybe the best compliment I can pay him. A truly significant basketball life. The NBA itself would be a very different league if Jerry West had never been a part of it. and the league is better for his participation. If you don't believe me, just look at the logo, right? So rest in peace to Jerry West, one of the most significant basketball minds and players in the history of the game. He will be missed, passing away on Wednesday at the age of 86. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to get into that Robert Williams trade. Not sure why DeMichael did it. I'm going to ask myself about it and then ask him more about it maybe on Friday. And then we'll close out today's show talking about sheltering players from PR shame with the NBA Finals, and then maybe in Memphis, Tennessee to an extent as well. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Oh, man, the finals are heating up. It's amazing to watch the Celtics team play. It's wonderful to watch Luka Doncic and the Mavs compete. It's a lot of fun as the basketball season concludes. How fun would it be, how cool, to go to an NBA Finals game? You can do that right now using the Game Time app. You can go through the Game Time app, find amazing deals, all sorts of different pieces that can make your finals experience or any ticket buying experience that much better. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. There's all-in pricing with that feature, showing you the total cost up front, no surprise fees at checkout, and the Game Time app has the lowest price guarantee. If you find a lower price for the same event in the same space, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are talking Robert Williams and the mistake that Michael made earlier in the week. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo. No DeMichael Cole. I miss him terribly. This is one of those rare weeks where it's a solo show for me, a couple of solo shows for him, solo show for me. Our goal is to be together for Friday. So Friday, got to get down on Friday. Hopefully you're there with DeMichael and I for the Friday edition of the show as we have fun. Looking forward to the weekend. Again, by myself this time around, and paying respect to Jerry West and the basketball genius that he was. That is something I do agree with Adam Silver on. I don't agree with DeMichael Cole and his trade for Robert Williams. And hopefully, I've read through the comments a little bit, and it seemed like for the most part you agreed. Here's my issue with the trade for Robert Williams. All right, here's my problem. Robert Williams does not check the box in terms of being a reliable physical player, right? He's coming off of a knee injury, only played 6 games this past season. This is a guy that if you're trying to get someone that's going to give you reps, right? If it's somebody that's going to actually play for you, he has only played more than 60 games once in his career. One time. And obviously COVID happened. That shortens things. Things get weird. He had one really impressive season, right? All defensive second team. He was involved in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. I think he finished 7th, 9th in Most Improved Player voting in the 2021-2022 campaign. So to DeMichael's credit, if you're trying to buy low on someone, if you're trying to make somebody feel like, come on, we're helping you out. We're making it easier for you, right? If you want to make somebody feel that way, I think the Portland Trailblazers are a good sucker. Right. And I wouldn't have said that to Mike on the show, of course. But I think that is a team that maybe will just want to try to get off of that contract. Right. They see him in bed and totally committed with DeAndre Ayton. Maybe they don't want to have the Time Lord uncertainty. They want to have more roster flexibility, whatever the case might be. Right. If you want to take that angle. But I think DeMichael gave up a protected first round pick. Right. I think he gave a top 10 protected first. I just feel like that's a lot for Robert Williams. And I understand that Robert Williams Jr. is young. That's an important part of this process, right? He's still relatively young, 26 years old. This is a guy who has a contract that has a little bit more team control, right? That matters. You want to have somebody that has that flexibility financially that allows for you to address that problem. And in fairness to DeMichael, this is a guy who, between him and Donovan Clingan, because that was the point, right? He was trading up to 7. So he took Clingan at 7 and had Robert Williams. theoretically speaking, if Williams is able to stay healthy, you solve the center problem, right? It checked that box. You've got two dudes that can play that position, and now Jaren can almost exclusively be a 4. And if that's where you want him to maximize his time, so be it. I'm cool with that side of the argument. I'm cool with saying Jaren at the 4 is the best use of Jaren. You can make an argument for him playing the 5, I think, maybe long term, but I don't know that that's where we're at right now with Jaren Jackson Jr. So him at the 4, if you're trying to win now, as the Grizzlies should be trying to, makes all the sense in the world. You double down on the center position. You take Klingon and bring in a center. 2 birds, 1 stone. I get it. Sorry to all the bird lovers out there. Robert Williams Jr. isn't the guy that I would target. And in fairness, it was a crossover episode with Locked On Blazers. It had to be a Blazers-related trade. I wouldn't have done it that way. I think I suggested a second rounder, another future first, just for the pick itself. And it was a heavily protected future first. And he rejected my trade. But he accepted the one with Time Lord involved. I would not go that route. I would try to find a way to bring in a Brook Lopez. You know, I've talked about in the past a trade involving Brook Lopez for Marcus Smart. You can get there financially in other ways. You can go Luke Kennard and John Conchar for Brook Lopez. And that's a little less likely because that involves 2 players instead of 1. But if you did those 2 guys and maybe 39 in this draft and a second round or in a future first, I think the Bucks might say yes to that. And it allows for Memphis to have the ability to bring in somebody like a Brook Lopez who has that capacity to space the floor. For me, Robert Williams and Klingon, although they're not similar in terms of how they play, they're similar in terms of not being 3-point threats. I would argue Klingon is a better passer. I think they're comparable rebounders. Hopefully Klingon's a little bit better, but I think they're comparable rebounders. You can make that argument. I think that Time Lord's value defensively is significant. Like having Robert Williams and Brandon Clark out there at the same time would be a lot of fun to watch. Switch everything as long as Williams is healthy. But as I've talked about here, there, and everywhere, sometimes the greatest ability in life is availability. And Time Lord has not been available. I think that a player like Brook Lopez will come cheaper. You certainly don't have to give up 9 to get him. I think you could still move up to get to a 7 and not have to get a Time Lord. Again, I struggle with if it's Conchar, Kennard, a future first. I don't know why why the Bucks would say no. And maybe we need to have a crossover episode with Locked On Bucks, or maybe you, dear listener, dear viewer, can tell me why I'm wrong. But that seems like a decent deal because Lopez is on an expiring contract, if I'm not mistaken. So you're basically renting the guy for a year unless he's willing to take a discount to stay with Memphis, which seems unlikely. So for a rental, you are putting yourself in a position to have a Lopez and a Klingon, potentially. And that, to me, you can do your 5-out stuff with Lopez. You can do more 4-out traditional stuff with like the Steven Adams mix with Klingon, and your center minutes are still covered. So I wouldn't go down the road of Robert Williams Jr. I just think there's a lot of injury baggage there. And given the last 18 months that the Grizzlies have endured, assume the worst when it comes to that stuff. So Robert Williams, I think, has value in the league. I agree with the logic that I think he could be had for less than what DeMichael gave up. And that's one of my biggest concerns with that deal that he pulled off. But in fairness to my partner, he addressed the center position. And I've said all along, as long as it gets addressed, I'm cool. It's not how I would have done it, but I think that at least it's acknowledging the glaring weakness in this Grizzlies team as constructed. And it's not like they had to sacrifice the core of what they're trying to be to get there. That matters a lot, right? Passing up on a player that may not be here a year from now. I think it was Luke Kennard that he dealt. Yeah, you're going to miss that guy. But at the same time, you have addressed a major position of need, and you're hopeful that a guy like a Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson, since it was addressed via the draft and trade, maybe in free agency, you find a wing that can shoot that's a little more cost-effective than Kennard. So I'm not really that mad at DeMichael. I would have gone a different route. Let me know what you think. I think you can get 2 seconds and Kennard and a Williams or something like that. I think that gets you Brooke Lopez, and it checks that box. Kennard or a Conchar. If I was Milwaukee, I would do that trade. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know what you think. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this episode talking about Kristaps Porzingis. I have to bring this up real quick. Forgive me. Injuring his torn medial retinaculum, which allows for dislocation of the posterior tibialis tendon in his left leg. Sounds like he just has a sore foot. And I'm going to talk about the importance of sheltering stars in the finals and overall, connecting it to the Grizzlies next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I'm not yelling at you. I get excited. I even get a little frustrated sometimes, right? Like, darn you, DeMichael. Why would you do what you did, right? Trading for Robert Williams. Everybody gets mad about certain things, right? I'm not going to scream at DeMichael. I love DeMichael. I'm not going to scream at you. I love you. This is Locked On Grizzlies. This isn't Fox Sports. This is an ESPN. We're going to give you analysis. We're going to give you opinion. We're going to give you context and content. And hopefully you're not just checking out Locked On Grizzlies for that. You're also checking out the 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today. You can also check it out over on Amazon on the Free Fire TV channels app. Amazing stuff, amazing content, not just from us, but Locked On Mavericks, Locked On Celtics, Locked On NBA, Locked On NHL. Pretty much anybody that's got a Locked On team is eligible to be a part of that Locked On streaming service. So Locked On Sports Today, check it out on YouTube or on Amazon as soon as possible. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. Woo, PrizePicks is fun. And with PrizePicks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a PrizePicks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. All you need to do is pick more or less on 6 players' stat projections, and you are locked in. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. It's as easy as saying you want to take Jason Tatum for more than 10 rebounds, or Jaylen Brown for more than 25 points, Caitlin Clark for more than 3.5 three-pointers made. Again, it's not just the NBA, it's hockey, it's the WNBA. So many different ways that you can get involved and have fun for PrizePicks. It's the perfect time to try out something new as basketball is winding down. You can even try out esports in the month of June. For every Wednesday and Saturday in June, if your lineup doesn't win, you'll get your entry fee back. You can choose from Counter-Strike 2, Call of Duty, League of Legends, and so much more. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out this episode, talking about the importance of protecting your stars. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, finishing up this Thursday edition of the podcast. Very happy to have you with me. Flying solo this time around. DeMichael Cole should be back with us for our Friday episode. We can see where the NBA Finals stand on this episode, not talking about Game 3. Wanted to focus more on a storyline going into Game 3 that really fascinated me. So Kristaps Porzingis, the oft-injured big man for the Boston Celtics, sitting out potentially, right? There was a question going into the game. Dislocation of the posterior tibialis tendon in his left leg because of a torn medial retinaculum. First off, I didn't know that was a thing. I'm fairly in tune with my body. I have a career that is based around athletics. I've been an athlete a large part of my life, or I was an athlete a large part of my life. Haven't heard of that injury before. And to Tom Ziller's credit, he has a great Substack newsletter, Good Morning Let's Basketball, in which he points out that it sounds like a bum wheel, right? In layman's terms. If you have a sore foot, that sounds like something that would be a way to describe what is currently happening to Kristaps Porzingis. And that's not to say that it doesn't hurt. And that's not to say that it may not impact his ability to leap, move, all the things that he is physically capable of doing. All of that is possible, right? The interesting piece of this when it comes to Porzingis is how he is so oft injured, right? He missed so many games in these playoffs already due to a strained calf or an issue with his leg. This is a different leg, different foot on the other side, and it's another problem that he's running into at an inopportune time. This is Game 3 of the finals, and while the Celtics can probably win this series without Kristaps Porzingis, they sure as heck can win it with him. If he can't play because his foot is sore and it bothers him to jump, to say it that way would probably piss off fans and people and leading to Porzingis being called soft with an SAWFT than it should if he's legitimately injured. So you make it sound maybe a little bit more intense than it is. And I think that led me to connect it to the Memphis Grizzlies in the way that the stuff with Joe Morant, right? All the different things that have gone on with him. How much do we not know that the team is not disclosed because they don't have to? How much has been covered up regarding those things? The team is always secretive when it comes to injuries. Obviously, Ja has issues or had issues beyond the injuries, but with injuries, they reveal as little as they possibly can in terms of timelines, in terms of returns to play. They are borderline secretive with a lot of the things that they do. And there's a real argument in the social media era, this age where you can open up your phone and have a wealth of information at your fingertips more than anybody that ever would have dreamed of going to the libraries of Alexandria and Athens back in the ancient times. I tell people that all the time. We don't realize the access to information that we have and how unique that makes us in the course of human history. To be able to do that and then be able to just trash a 7'3" guy who can't play on a bum foot, that is a real deal thing. So you have to be aware of helping your players, and you have to be in a position to set them up for success, right? You want to be that umbrella from the rain that is hot takes on social media and elsewhere. Because Porzingis is injured so often that you could make an argument if you wanted to. I'm not so inclined, but I'm sure there's somebody right now on the internet saying that Porzingis is soft and he needs to get over it and go play. And why is this even a thing? Back in my day, I would have played with no feet, right? Somebody's saying that somewhere. That's not reality, especially in 2024 when you have so many medical professionals and so many folks on staff. Their literal job is to try to protect these players physically. And then you have additional people on staff whose jobs it is to protect these players from a public relations standpoint. All these guys have a brand. All of these guys have interests beyond the basketball court. And even if their largest interest is basketball, they in and of themselves have to be in a spot to not be labeled as someone who is injured or injury prone, to not be labeled as someone who is soft in air quotes, whatever the case might be. In the case of a Joe Morant, you're trying to protect him from all the kind of unfair criticisms that may come. Fair criticism is a different thing, but you want to protect a player, whether it's injury related, whether it's off the court behavior related. The interactions between players and teams and the things that they have to think about in 2024, to bring it full circle on today's episode, are very different from Jerry West time, right? That demand was not on a player like Jerry West. Now, the athletes were quite different, of course, and there's lots of ways that we could go down this road. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the Porzingis-Celtics relationship, I think Porzingis has a greater respect for Boston, or at least a greater appreciation for that organization because of the way that they're addressing this. And the Grizzlies have done similar things with their injury reports, how they don't disclose contract negotiations or agreements. That sort of stuff, depending on the player, matters to the player. And in this era where they are under a microscope more than ever before, they are more aware of that stuff than ever before. So maybe 10 years ago, you say a guy's got a sore foot and it's really bothering him and maybe he doesn't play. Maybe it's not as big of a deal, 20 years ago even. But to say you have a sore foot in 2024, somebody's going to have a podcast up within 30 minutes about how Kristaps Porzingis is costing the Celtics the championship. Is that true? No. But it's important to keep that perspective, and you want to have strong player relationships to be an organization where people want to come play for you. The Celtics have history. They have a strong group. They already have that set up for them. I think the Grizzlies are doing a good job building that on their end. They don't have the history yet, but I do think they've done well with the Joe Morant situation, all the injury problems. You want to be able to shelter players and protect them so that they are not in a position to have to answer questions themselves, and they are in the best position to be successful as they can be. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated. The next time that we are together, it'll be our Friday episode. DeMichael and I should be back together. Maybe we'll dive into the basketball of the NBA Finals a little bit. Maybe we'll take a look around the NBA mock drafts with the draft just a couple of weeks away. A lot of different directions we can go. And maybe I'll yell a little bit, not yell, because I want you to come back, right? This isn't ESPN or Fox Sports. But maybe I'll ask DeMichael again about the Robert Williams trade, see how he feels about my Brook Lopez idea. I don't think you need to give up first for Brook Lopez, but we'll see, right? And again, it was a crossover episode, which was a great episode. Check it out if you haven't listened. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Make us a part of your NBA content consumption each and every time an episode drops. DeMichael appreciates it, as do I. Be sure to check out every sponsor that we have and support them. Supporting our sponsors is supporting us. And make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, either on Amazon Fire TV with the Free Channels app or over on our streaming service on YouTube. Thank you again. Happy to be back with you, and I look forward to the next time that we're together. Until then, stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts, we are Locked On Grizzlies. We'll catch you next time